Hello and welcome to Let's Be Honest. I'm your host, your girl, that legal cousin you love, Just Johnda. And I am coming to you with a special Just Johnda LBD live on YouTube. This is also going to go up on the podcast. For those who are used to listening to me on the podcast and who are listening to the playback of this stream, some of the things I say may sound a little different, and that is only because of YouTube regulations. So the way that I phrase things might just be a little different, but hang in there because we have got a lot to talk about. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead in the comments. I'm going to get into that as well. So I have the indictment. You know how we do. We are going to go through the indictment, and I'm going to break things down. I'm going to bring you some of that 20 plus years of legal experience. Hey, Abby, welcome with your snacks. And so I'm going to bring you that 20 years of experience, most of it being in criminal defense. So this is absolutely my wheelhouse. And so one of the things that I wanted to touch base on, you see that I have the press conference up. I was going to play it back, but there's just way too much to talk about. And I know that a lot of you have already watched the press conference. So we're just going to jump right into the indictment. There was some stuff that was said during the press conference. But mostly, I'm just asking, what in the baby oil? How many freaking bottles of baby oil do you need? Ebby, how many? I don't know, but it seems like you need way too many if you're with Diddy and you are down with the freak off. So I'm going to take this down and let's get right into the indictment because it is a lot. So I am bringing that up for you right now, and we are going to, as the song says, dive in. Okay. All right. So we're going right to the top. So let's do it. You guys ready? Okay. Okay, I'm with you, Ebby. How ashy? How ashy do you have to be in order to use that many? And I mean, let's just face it, it's nasty. Baby oil is just nasty no matter what. Okay. And I'm not going to say why I know, but we all know you don't put any oil in certain places. And if I were defending him, of course, after many years, I have spent time trying to perfect the art of, as a judge complimented me once first. I mean, in Virginia, they'll say anything. He said that I'd mastered the art of making a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Now, I guess my grandmother would call that pigfoot. But I suppose if I were dealing with Diddy, I'd say, look, you need all of that baby oil when you are having a baby oil pool party. Well, of course, a baby oil pool party takes a whole lot to clean up, but you never know what you're going to need out in these streets. Okay, so let's get started. For decades, Sean, aka Puff Daddy, aka Diddy, we know he has a bunch of names. I'm not going to deal with all the AKAs, but we know that for years he has had these parties, right? And so the indictment jumps right in with that. For decades, Sean Combs, the defendant, abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. Now, one thing that I want to point out to you all listening or watching, is you may notice that this sounds a whole lot like the suit that was brought by Dawn Richards. So I want you to keep that in mind because I do think that there is something to be said for people jumping out there after likely being called by the grand jury to make sure that they were okay. You're going to hear a lot of stuff that is going to sound eerily familiar, especially as it relates to people who worked for him, who then brought cases of their own or have given interviews. So let's go on. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. So, yes, girl, baby oil pool party. So, I'm going to stop there for a quick second because for those who hang with me, you will know that I like for my folks to be the smartest people on the air, the smartest people on that are listening on podcasts. We're also the coolest and the funniest, but the smartest. And so while we go through this, it's good to know um, what the prosecution is getting to when they do this. So I've read over this, obviously, before coming on. This is a textbook lesson in why the feds are so good at what they do and why they get it done right. Because when they bring a case, they literally hit those elements one behind the other as if they've taken them right out of the books, right? So we know what they're doing and we know that they're doing it well. Now, as it relates to the criminal enterprise, you're going to see where they lay out exactly what the enterprise is, what the elements that make up the enterprise are, and who did what as they go through this. So we know that we're going to get everything that we need from this case. I'm going to keep jumping in to make sure that you know what the penalties are as we go through this. So you're not just listening to me read this to you without giving you the real life realities. If you went through the R. Kelly case with me, you know from listening to the episodes that I did on those cases, it was the same thing. The prosecution needs to not only say that this conspiracy took place, they not only need to talk about the underlying crimes, but they also need to lay out the elements and prove the elements of those underlying crimes as well. Because if you can't prove that there's any underlying crimes, then whatever you think this conspiracy is or this racketeering or any of that doesn't matter. And you also have to tie in the fact that the crimes that were being committed, that they all were connected and all of them were for the sole purpose of letting the person who was the master, in this case, the master is going to be Sean Combs. You have to make sure that all of those things go up to the top. So they need to triangulate. You need to have not only the crimes and their elements and the fact that they were being committed, you also need the minions who were helping to facilitate, and that all goes up to the top to help the person ultimately do what they're attempting to do. So that is why we're going to go through what is going to appear to be building blocks, both to the crimes and those important elements. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page with that. And if you have any questions, again, put them in the comments. I'm going to try and click back and forth so that I can view the comments as well as go through the indictment. So paragraph 2, Sean Combs, I'm not going to go through all the AKAs, operated his business headquarters at various times in Manhattan and Los Angeles. So that's why you get into the Southern District of New York jurisdiction, under a variety of United States-based corporate entities, including Bad Boy. We know, Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, Combs Global, all of these collectively known as Combs Business and its corporate entities in the Combs business included, among other things, record labels, a recording studio, an apparel line, an alcoholic spirits business. Well, maybe. We know he didn't pay for that. A marketing agency and a televised network and media company. I think that televised network and media company, especially his ventures with MTV and making the band, are definitely going to come back and bite him on the butt in this one. At all times relevant to this indictment, so this just talks about jurisdiction, but what he did. At all times relevant to this indictment, the defendant engaged in a persistent and pervasive pattern of abuse toward women and other individuals. This abuse was at times verbal, emotional, physical, and for YouTube purposes, and intellectual. As part of his pattern of abuse, Combs manipulated women to participate in highly orchestrated performances of sexual activity with male commercial ex workers. At times, Combs and others acting at his direction made arrangements for women and commercial ex workers to fly to Combs' location. Combs ensured participation from the women by, among other things, obtaining and distributing narcs to them, controlling their careers, leveraging his financial support, and threatening to cut off the same, and using intimidation and violence. Again, none of this is surprising because when you talk about coercion, how else are you going to get it? And when you are dealing with coercion with people with a ton of money, that is where these things come in. I'm going to check the chat, see if you have any questions. Okay, so let's get back to it because we've got a lot to cover. Thank you for those who are coming into the room. Okay, physical abuse by Combs, the defendant, was recurrent and widely known. We heard about this from Cassie. We heard about this from Dawn Richards. There was another gentleman who, his name is escaping me. It'll come back in a moment, but there was a man, not the weird guy in the Michigan prison. We know that that's on some other stuff, but the songwriter who also talked about not only being around the violence, but experiencing the violence on numerous occasions from at least on or about 2009 and continuing for years. So we know the Cassie years are going to figure prominently in this. Combs assaulted women by, among other things, striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects at, and kicking them. Trigger warning for those who I did not mention this before because this gets pretty graphic. These beatings were at times witnessed by others and included one instance at a Los Angeles hotel in or about March 16th, which was captured on video, lively reported. This is obviously the Cassie incident outside of the elevator, where Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a woman as she was attempting to leave. When a member of the hotel staff intervened, Combs attempted to bribe the staff member to ensure silence. Combs' acts were also not limited to these women. It extended to his employees, witnesses, to his abuse and others. Again, we know that the songwriter, whose name, if someone can remember his name, please put it in the chat. I hate to keep referring to him as the songwriter, but we all know who I'm talking about. He mentioned that as well. And again, if you saw Making the Band, while we didn't see him lay hands, we definitely saw behavior that could be termed as nothing short of abusive. Certainly someone who displayed narcissistic tendencies for sure. I don't know why I got a tongue tie there. I guess I need to drink some water. Okay, Sean Combs, the defendant, used his business, including employees, to carry out, facilitate, and cover up his behavior and commercial acts. Those employees, including security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and high-ranking supervisors and other close associates, acted as Combs' intermediaries, and their conduct was facilitated and assisted by Combs' control of the business. So now you already see we're laying the groundwork for the enterprise. And we're going to jump right into that in the next paragraph. Because again, to have the enterprise, you have to have you've got to make it work. And the best way to make that work, because it gets complicated when the prosecution tries to prove a racketeering case if you don't have the other actors. And as you saw in the press conference, there was a question asked, and it was an important question about whether or not other individuals will be charged. And this is where it comes in handy that when you have someone like me with 20 plus years of experience in the game, will other people be charged? Potentially. However, if those other individuals are cooperating witnesses, they don't necessarily have to be charged for the conspiracy to still move forward. It is no different on the back end as it would be on the front end if you charge them and then they make a deal with you, or they make a deal with you in advance and they never get charged. We have definitely seen this in other cases. Operation Varsity Blues definitely comes to mind, because in that case you had the partner of the main actor immediately turn on the head of the scheme. And so he was wearing a wire. You also had the individual who was running the scheme wearing a wire. Now, he did get some charges. I believe his name was Singer. They didn't let him walk away scot-free, but he walked away with a hell of a lot less than he would have, because of the fact that he cooperated immediately. So these other individuals who testified before the grand jury and ultimately will testify at trial, if this goes to trial, those individuals don't necessarily have to be charged. So it was a great question asked by the person from the press, but I'm giving you the skinny on it right here. Okay, let's see. I jumped ahead a bit too much. Okay, so the Combs Enterprise. From at least in or about 2008, of course, there's many who would say that this enterprise began well before that, but they've got a statute of limitations to contend with. So even though I'm sure prosecutors would love to go back into the 90s, they simply can't. To a certain degree. Now, if there was ongoing criminal behavior, and they can tie each thing, the causal link, something started in 93, then went from 94, and the same thing was going in 95. And there's a causal link that bring you all the way to a time within the statute of limitations, then those things can certainly be discussed. If nothing else, they're a pattern of behavior. But if those things are directly linked and they were in part of an ongoing scheme, then you're good with your statute of limitations, as long as the last acts in that scheme took place within your statutory time period. So from at least on or about 2008 through on or about the date of filing of this indictment, Combs, the defendant, and others known and unknown, because as AUSA Williams said, there is an ongoing criminal investigation, and they are encouraging people to come forward. And believe you me, those people are going to come forward. All of this no snitch stuff, I tell people all the time, as someone who does this work and has done it for many years, it is complete bull. Clients, I've had so many clients, and I'm talking everybody from gang members to, low-level criminals and everything in between. They make themselves very hard to defend, because they start singing like a bird before the cuffs are even on. They are singing like a bird by the time you have any level of anything going on in the case. Excuse me, you all. I am just going to log on really quickly to IG to make sure that there are no questions there, because we are live in several different places. So I'm still here, but if those on YouTube, you see me looking down, that is why. Okay, so members and associates of the Combs enterprise engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other activities, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion, and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice, which could literally be anything. I mean, trying to hide stuff, putting stuff on planes. What was homie going to the airport for? You know, the former college basketball player with the bag full of drugs that was also at the same private airfield of Diddy the same day of the raid. What was that about? And we haven't heard from him since. Interesting, interesting. The Combs enterprise, including its leadership, its members, and its associates, constituted an enterprise as defined by Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1961-4, that is a group of individuals associated in fact, although not a legal entity. So, as I told you, there's a lot of definitions in this. I'm going to skip around with some of those, not to bore you, because I'm going to give you the real life examples of how this works. Okay, the entities within the Combs business, including but not limited to Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global, individuals employed by and associated with the Combs business, and others known and unknown. The Combs Enterprise constituted an ongoing organization whose members function as a continuing unit for a common purpose of achieving the objectives of the Combs Enterprise. Bottom line, because we're getting into a lot of legalese, long story short, they're just defining for the court, because you need to make sure that your finder of fact, whether this ends up being a judge trial or a jury trial, most likely a jury if it goes that far, you need to make sure that your finder of fact can hit those elements. And even that comes up. That's going to be one of the first very obvious arguments that his attorney makes. Where's the criminal enterprise? What are you talking about? You're making it sound like my client was running some scheme in order to do these bad things. You're reaching AUSA Williams. Your office is so desperate to convict my client that you are trying to turn this into, for one a better way of putting it, a mafia situation in order to make your case stick. So it's important for them to essentially make sure, for the trier of fact, that these pegs fit into the holes that they want to put them in. They need to make sure that if you're going to call this a criminal enterprise for the purposes of racketeering, and do understand when we're talking about racketeering, that comes under the RICO statute. We need to make sure that it's an actual criminal enterprise, because if not, that entire set of charges falls apart. Okay. And the Combs Enterprise operated in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere. And they established that earlier when they talked about him having principal places of business in Manhattan. For at all times relevant to this, the defendant was the leader of the enterprise. So that's what I was talking about earlier when I said the master, the leader, all of those things. And when I talked about the fact that this needs to triangulate, you need to have the bad behavior in one corner. You need to have the fact that there were actors helping to effectuate this bad behavior. And the bad behavior has to be for the benefit of that leader. And so that's where those things triangulate. Okay, Sean Combs, the defendant, and others known and unknown, because again, this is an ongoing investigation, participated in unlawful and other activities related to the conduct of the Combs Enterprise affair. So that's the other part of, that's the other piece of that triangle. These individuals included certain Combs business employees, such as members of his security staff, household staff, personal assistant, high ranking supervisors, as well as other close associates of Combs. So now it gets real messy because when we talk about those other close associates, those aren't necessarily employees. Those are the individuals whose names keep getting thrown into this. Those are the individuals who were allegedly at the parties helping to make all of this happen. Those are the individuals who said, "Hey, I've got some girls, let's hop on a plane." Those are the individuals who were maybe at dinner when all of this are going on. Those are people like the alleged, like the attorneys and managers that Cassie alleged that called and harassed her to get her to come back, or who made not so subtle threats to her about her person or her career to get her to return home. Those are the close associates. Those aren't always necessarily people who are working for him. Friends. It gets real messy, and that's why we see everybody running for cover. And that is why we see that there are people who are giving statements, interviews, or even filing suits of their own, hearken to Dawn Richards, where there is a lot of language that sounds exactly like the language that came out in an indictment that was executed and unsealed a mere, what, 4 days after her suit was filed? Very interesting. And again, that's not to disparage her in any way. I read that. I read that suit. We're going to actually do a separate episode on that later. I was hanging out at the CBC this weekend, so I didn't have a chance to get to it. We're going to do a separate episode on that. I do, especially as someone who watched Making the Band and just watched how Diddy moved, and, all of the different things that other people have said, personal contacts that I had that's given me lots of great information and background. There is, I don't have any doubt about the things that she's saying. It's just, there's just a little messiness around who is saying it and how it's being said. Now, on the flip side of that, she's also represented by Lisa Bloom, who, of course, is from the Gloria Allred School of Practice. And depending on the client, especially a woman client in the Me Too era, they are positioning most of their clients in this arena from a victim's rights standpoint. So I think that there's elements of that suit that would have been written that way no matter what. But considering the timing and how closely this language tracks, I also don't doubt that that Dawn Richard, I'm sorry, I keep saying Richards, that Dawn Richard was potentially on that grand jury witness list, and based on things that were being asked and a suit that she may have wanted to file anyway, it colored the way that things were relayed, for want of a better way of putting it. Okay, so let's get into the purposes of this criminal enterprise, because that is where we really get into the crux of what this is, of what the criminal enterprise is, because again, we've got to connect those sides. We've got to connect these pieces of the triangle. So let's get into it. All right. So the purposes of the Combs Enterprise included the following: operating a global business in the media, entertainment, and lifestyle industry. So, of course, the things that we know that he was doing that were, the right thing to do, of course. Let's see, operating a global business, media, entertainment, lifestyle industries, including other things: record labels, a recording studio, an apparel line, alcoholic spirits business, a marketing agency, a television network, a media company. So we know that all of those things were we're going on. Okay, so we're on live. So the Instagram is going live as well. Again, just making sure so that we can answer any questions over there. Okay, still here, guys. Okay. Preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power, reputation, and brand of Sean Combs, the defendant, as a musician, entrepreneur, and figure in the entertainment industry. Enriching members and associates of the enterprise, including its leader, and in particular those who demonstrated loyalty to Combs and willingness to conceal his crimes. Preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power of Combs' enterprise, including the power of his leaders, through violence, use of arms, threats of violence, coercion, and verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. Fulfilling the personal desires of Combs, particularly those related to Combs' sexual gratification, including through the exploitation of women and the use of commercial sex workers. Enabling Combs, and for those who may just be tuning into the podcast, there's a reason why I have to alter the way that I say certain things related to YouTube. All right. So continuing on, enabling Combs and other members and associates, they are going in on this enabling to engage in unlawful acts of violence, including sexual violence, trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion, and enticement to engage in prostitution, narc distribution, and other crimes, and concealing the commission of such acts. Protecting the Combs enterprise and its members and associates, including Combs, from detection and prostitution of law enforcement authorities through acts of intimidation, manipulation, bribery, and threats of retaliation against individuals who witnessed the crimes committed by members and associates of the enterprise. You all just bear with me. I am getting texts from people who are not seeing this on their feed. So just making sure that they get it. All right. Sometimes these things, when you set them up, when they work great, they work great. If they don't, they don't. And so just got to fix them when they need to be, right? Okay. All right. Now, among the means and methods by which Sean Combs, the defendant, and other associates of the Combs enterprise conducted and participated in the conduct of the affairs of the enterprise, these are some of the things they did. So again, we're going to skim through in order to cover it all. So they said they wielded power, the power and prestige. So we know that's going to keep coming up over and over again, basically using their power in a way that made sure that they got what they wanted, particularly to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into his orbit, often under the premise of a romantic relationship, that they would use force, threats of force, coercion to cause the victims to engage in extended sex acts, excuse that, with male commercial ex workers that Combs referred to as, among other things, freak offs. The freak offs were elaborate and produced performances where he arranged and directed and even pleasured himself during, and often he recorded them. By the way, interesting to note that during the press conference, I know I sound like I'm like, oh, during the press conference, that some of these things were recorded. So let's see how that works. We're not going to see them, but right now, but I guarantee if this goes to trial, they will be played in court. And then it's stuff is going to get even messier. So, back to uh let's see again, just sending. Okay. All right. So they were these elaborate performances. So we heard about these from Cassie, right? Remember Cassie talked about these freak offs. I wonder if this is where all the baby oil came in. For those of you who are just jumping in, over 100 bottles of baby oil. Now, I've already said if I were representing him and we were talking about the baby oil and all of that stuff, I'd probably be inclined to say that I don't know. It's so crazy. I would probably be inclined to say that those things are that they were used to that the baby oil was they were going to have a pool party, maybe. I don't know. We got to give it something, right? At this point, we got to go with whatever we can get. And of course, when you are representing somebody and the facts are ridiculous, they found your guns, they found 1,000 bottles of baby oil, they found videos, drugs, and everything else. You got to just come up with what you can come up with. I'm still saying it was all going in the pool and we were having a baby oil pool party. Okay. I may even change that to change the title of this series because it's definitely not going to be one episode to baby oil pool party. Okay, so freak offs occurred regularly. How much does one dude need? Also, with the assistance of members and associates of the Combs Enterprise, remember that associates piece, they transported and caused to be transported commercial SX workers across state lines and internationally. So now we're getting into some international freaking. During the freak offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances, not surprising, to the victims, in part to keep them obedient and compliant. That's giving some real R. Kelly taste. Nasty. Sometimes, unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of victims engaging in sex acts with commercial SX workers. Again, I'm trying to remember YouTube doesn't like you to use certain words, but I'm used to my podcast crew. After freak offs, Combs and the victims typically received IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Okay, take it from me, your girl, Just Johnda, a woman of a certain age. If your activities require you to have to get IV fluids, maybe consider some other activities. I'm just saying. Let's check these comments. Don't forget to put any questions in there. I'm happy to answer them because you are getting 20 plus years of legal experience, particularly in the criminal arena. As we go through this and as we talk about these cases and many of the other things that are not even criminally related, on my podcast and on my YouTube platform. So feel free to ask me any questions, and if I can answer it, I am happy to do so. Take advantage. Members and associates of the Combs Enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, household staff. So we know who they're talking about. So we're just going to start calling him the members and associates. They facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the rooms with the required freak-off supplies. We're going to assume that included a hell of a lot of baby oil. Lubricant, extra linens, lighting, cleaning the hotel rooms after the freak-offs. Sounds like they were cleaning up a ding, ding, ding crime scene to try to mitigate room damage, arranging for travel of the victims, commercial sex workers, and Combs himself to and from the freak-offs, resupplying Combs with requested supplies, delivering large sums of cash to pay off the commercial SX workers, and scheduling the delivery of IV fluids. We know that that wasn't the only thing that they were scheduling the delivery of, but we'll go on. In or about March 2024, during the searches of Combs' residences in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, law enforcement seized various freak-off supplies, including narcotics and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. 1,000 bottles. I want to know how big the bottles are because, again, I'm still filling up the pool. Combs subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse to cause the victims to engage in freak-offs. Combs maintained control over his victims through, among other things, physical violence, promises of career opportunities, granting and threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive means, including trafficking their whereabouts, dictating the victim's appearance, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying them with controlled substances. During and separate from the freak-offs, Combs, among other things, hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims at times by their hair. These assaults often resulted in injuries that took days or weeks to heal from. And again, we heard about that with Cassie. I believe, if recollection serves, Azalea Banks even talked about this as well in her contact with Cassie. Okay, so let's go on. This again, trigger warning in case you missed the last one. These Combs also threatened victims' careers, made demands, risking their financial security, their livelihoods, job security, and of course, lots of physical, emotional abuse going on with this situation as well. Members and associates of the enterprise, including his security personnel, at times carried arms. On more than one occasion, Combs himself carried or brandished arms to intimidate or threaten others, including victims or witnesses to the things that he did. In or about March 2024, during the searches of his residences in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, law enforcement seized arms and ammo, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, as well as a drum machine. Members and associates control over the victims by following his directions regarding financial payments to them. Well, they enabled control of them by filing his regarding financial payments to them, advancing or suppressing their career opportunities, and or acquiring controlled substances to use them. For those who are coming in the room, feel free to share the link for this. And again, please go in the comments. Feel free to ask me any questions you like. Again, I'm bringing you over 20 years of criminal experience as I go through this. So, well, not as a criminal. Well, I won't get into my personal business. No, not as a criminal. Okay. So next we're going to continue on. So this first part, we know they're just laying out what the members of the conspiracy did, or rather what the members of the enterprise do, because we have to establish this enterprise and that the enterprise actually had people running it. Do not forget our triangle. Right now, we are on the membership side of the triangle. Who were the actors? Who were the enterprise? Because we're establishing that an enterprise existed. And in order to establish that an enterprise existed, we have to say there were people in it, and this is what they did, and this is why. We already know the top of the triangle, which is who is it for? And did he direct these things? And they are tying those two pieces together. So we got this one slant. The leader, the leader directing the enterprise, the individuals running the enterprise at that person's behest. Once we get into the actual offenses and the breakdown of those offenses, we're saying what they are, but once we get into the breakdown of those offenses, then we will tie it together. Okay, so we're still here, this part. Okay. These acts of violence, and for those of you who are listening, when I say we're still here, we're talking about the top of the triangle, and let's just go for shits and giggles, the right-hand corner. Okay, these acts of violence included kidnapping and arson. On multiple occasions, he threw both objects and people. It's one thing when we talk about throwing objects. What is your little ass doing throwing people? I'm going to have to assume that the throwing people involved other people. Because when I look at Diddy, he looks like somebody that we all could toss. Okay. Here with the snacks. Welcome, D-Rod. Here with the snacks. We are getting into it. You haven't missed a whole lot because there is a lot going on with this case. Okay. When Combs' authority or reputation was threatened with the possibility of negative publicity or legal or law enforcement action against him, including in or about late 2023 following public allegations of his crimes, Combs and his members and associates pressured witnesses, victims, included an attempted bribery to stay silent and not report what they experienced or knew. On phone calls, Combs and others, among other things, provided these victims and witnesses with false narratives of events in an effort to conceal his crimes. He caused these calls to be recorded on at least 2 occasions. Why are you recording things? Why are you recording things? That is the last thing you do. You don't put it in writing. You don't record. You don't send emails. You don't have any record of your crimes. But see, when you are dealing with people with a certain pathology, they have patterns. You're also dealing with people who think that they're untouchable and who are untouchable as well. So I can keep trophies. I can keep proof. And remember, this is going to help with the criminal enterprise piece, because if I am recording a conversation with you, then that is what we would call mutually assured destruction. If you tell on me, I tell on you, you were down with whatever was going on because I recorded us both in the midst of some bullshit. Mutually assured destruction. The problem with that is it's still recorded. And if someone else gets a hold of it and the other person flips before you do, especially when you're the person that everybody's after, guess what? The mutually assured destruction doesn't matter. Yes, the other person may look like an a-hole, but for you, this is helping to put nails in your coffin, or rather putting more security around your jail cell, because you're going to need it. All right. So now we're getting into how the conspiracy worked, because again, right now, what the prosecution is doing with this indictment, they're circling the drain with the elements leading up to telling the court, this is what the charges were. We have laid out the elements for you, Your Honor. We have laid out that this is the criminal activity. We have defined all of these elements. We have told you what the enterprise is, what an enterprise is, and how it applies in this situation. And now we're going to get into racketeering, what it is and how it applies in this situation, so that we have our racketeering conspiracy. So for those of us who have been saying for a long minute that this was leading up to some manner of a RICO situation, well, here we go. The racketeering conspiracy. from at least in or about 2008 through on or about the date of filing of this indictment in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere. I don't doubt that there are going to be indictments in Los Angeles as well. Combs and others, known and unknown, because remember, not everybody has been picked up yet, being persons employed by and associated with the Combs enterprise, described in paragraphs 6 through 12 of this indictment, an enterprise engaged in and the activities of which affected interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly combined, conspired, confederated, and agreed together, because that's what you need for a conspiracy. These, you get a whole bunch of fancy words, but the bottom line is there needs to be a meeting of the minds. That is what all of this boils down to. Was there a meeting of the minds? The AUSA is saying that there was. So these persons described in paragraph 6 through 12, those are the people in the enterprise, engaged in the activities which affected interstate and foreign commerce. They knowingly did this, and they agreed together to violate the racketeering laws of the United States, to wit, Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 1962, subsection C. That is, to conduct and participate directly and indirectly in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity, as defined in sections 1961, subsection 1 and 1961, subsection 5. Now, what those subsections do, because again, I'm not going to bore you. The way that this works is they'll have the act, which is the racketeering activity, and in those subsections, it defines everything that falls under underlying crimes going towards that can be defined as racketeering. So you need they're charging him with conspiracy. So you need the agreement, but you also need the alleged offenses to marry up with that agreement. So the question then becomes, as we go through paragraphs A, B, and C, and I want you all to keep this in mind. The question then becomes for the trier of fact. Trier of fact is who? Our judge or our jury. Did individuals actively have a meeting of the minds and agree? Because this is going to be great for the defense to argue. As a defense attorney, I would settle into this hole and argue it all day long, among other things. And as we've gone through, I've thrown you a few bones with some of those arguments. But this is one that I would definitely, from a defense standpoint, win or lose, I'm going to argue it. Did individuals actually have a meeting of the minds to, as subparagraph A says, participate in kidnapping, and that's kidnapping under the California Penal Code. And again, they're charging federally, so they can put the California acts there too. Arson. Did these individuals agree to, let's say, set Kid Cudi's car on fire and maybe whomever else? Did they have a meeting of the minds about that? Or were they just rogue actors? Was this a part of a vast conspiracy? Did they sit around the table a la New Jack City saying, I am my brother's keeper. Today we're going to do kidnapping, arson, bribery, all of these things. Bribery is number C, bribing a witness, which allegedly they have some recordings. Multiple other acts, including witness tampering, victim, trying to coerce, intimidate a victim. Forced labor, which also falls under there. SX trafficking, which also falls under it. Other illegal SX trafficking, including travel for the purposes of prostitution and other acts. Distribution of narcs, including cocaine, oxycodone, alprazolam, and methamphetamines. We also have some other stuff in there too. We've got ketamine, we've got gamma hydroxybutyric. Some of these, as we know, they all get put together, like when they're making the pink cocaine or the lean, or they're just putting everything together and lacing stuff. Again, we heard about that from Cassie and others. Um, then distribution or possession with intent to distribute, or conspiracy to do the same. Remember, you don't necessarily have to be selling in order to distribute drugs. Uh, Evidence of money, especially being someone who has myself, who has defended people for many, many, many drug cases, including possession with intent. Evidence of distribution, one of the main things, obviously, is not just the drugs. And of course, you have the sheets, as we call them. You've got your call sheets, your term sheets, any of those that you would use when people are keeping track of their clientele. Mostly people keep it in their phones, so phone subpoenas are important. And one of the obvious, as we call them, or as law enforcement calls them, indicia of distribution. Remember that? So learn something new today. Indicia of distribution would be money. That is not always needed. It is definitely one that ticks the boxes, especially when the money is put together in certain ways, when it is in certain denominations. Okay, I won't keep down that rabbit hole, but you get the point. You can get caught up with distribution if you're just handing it out, especially if there's minors involved, and especially even if there's not minors, if there is evidence, particularly concerning in this case, that a lot of this was done with the express purpose of attempting to inebriate people or incapacitate them in some way. Let me check the comments. Okay, so we're good there. Just making sure if you all have any questions, I am answering them. All right. Furthering the conspiracy, they sometimes they said that some of them would commit at least 2 acts. Now, this is where things get really nasty. They are giving notice of a special sentencing factor. Special sentencing factors are important, especially when you have crimes like the ones that Diddy is charged with. We're going to get into the penalties shortly as soon as we go into the specific offenses, especially when you have crimes where there is a wide range of punishment. Several of the things, actually, I want to say, is it all 3? Definitely 2 of the 3. I'll come back to that when we get to the specific crimes, because I have it in my notes. But definitely 2 of the 3 crimes that he is charged with carries anything from fines to up to 10 years. One carries from fines and or up to 20 years. And 2 of them carry and or up to life, depending on the nature of the underlying offenses. By that, I mean, if most of the underlying offenses charged alone, having nothing to do with the conspiracy, but you got to prove those underlying offenses, like let's say one of the arson charges or something like that, any of them really. Let's say any one of them carried no more than 10 years, 20 years max, depending on the charge, then your sentencing range would likely stay in there, especially for someone with no record. However, if any of those crimes carry more than that, then that opens the door for the sentencing range to go higher than that. So there is a wildly vast range. It's like a Mr. Toad's wild ride of sentencing when it comes to how a judge could view this situation. So, or trier, fact, a jury, a judge, depending on what they get. This isn't going to be a judge trial. If it goes to trial, trust and believe they're going to want a jury. The prosecution is. So special sentencing factors make a difference, because if there is anything that enhances penalties, those are the things that help bump you up out of those minimum ranges. Kind of like back when we had the Jennifer Shaw trial. Jen Shaw was the woman from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. She was charged in cases that involved this messy, over, I think, probably 7 to 10 year long criminal enterprise. She wasn't involved in it for that long, but it went on for that long. Criminal enterprise as it related to, they didn't charge with RICO, but close, as it related to telefraud. And so one area where we saw enhanced penalties play key in that case is the people who they spent most of their time defrauding, for obvious reasons, especially when you're doing telecommunications fraud, were the elderly. So anyone that is considered a victim that is particularly vulnerable, the elderly, or anyone that is underage, there are enhanced penalties in a lot of arenas as it relates to them. That was a key factor in her case, and is part of the reason why she got so much time, considering that she had no criminal record and it was a white collar situation. So notice of a special sentencing factor is something that should stick out, because it does, and it does make a huge difference. From at least in or about 2009 up to and including in or about 2018 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, as part of this agreement to conduct and participate in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity, Combs, the defendant, agreed to, in and affecting the language is a little weird, in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, provided, obtained, advertised, maintained, patronized, and solicited by any means a person knowing and in reckless disregard of the fact that by means or force, threats of force, fraud, coercion, as described, any combination, the person to participate in the commercial SMEX Act. So let me break that down because it gets a little crazy. The bottom line is that is the human trafficking element of all of this for the purposes of SX. So that is a special intervening factor, because you are talking about potentially transporting human beings. You're also talking about doing it foreign. It is also for the purposes of SX. Built into this is also the possibility that individuals may be underage. That is part of the reason why you see the reckless disregard for these things, because when you get into the possibility that the person is underage, the first thing that people are going to say, and understandably so, is what they knew or didn't know. Well, that's where the reckless disregard comes into play. You didn't care. And let's face it, there's a certain look associated with underage women, or women who are close to underage. And this is women and men. Let's not forget that. Or individuals who are close to that. It is a predilection that people have. Individuals who tend to deliberately want to have relations with individuals, with people who are underage, want that look, what they think, that feel, what they think comes along with being with someone who is underage. So even if they are right on the bubble, they might be 18. All of that, you know what you're doing. It's no accident. And when you are soliciting them for people, you know what the individuals you are soliciting them for want. There is not a pimp, madam, or whatever else you want to call yourselves alive, other mode of human trafficker, SX trafficking, that doesn't know the predilection of their clientele, and that when they are getting individuals for their friends, associates, or clients who or what they want them to look like. And if it's underage, even if they're not actually underage, they know what they're going after. Like, comment, and subscribe. Let's not forget that. I have it scrolling along the bottom, but if you're listening, come back to me. Okay, so let's talk about the sentencing structure for that. I've got multiple screens going, so just bear with me. So when we talk about that, that is up to 20 years. It is, of course, fines. You could be fined and or up to 20 years or life if the underlying charge carries it. And so that's what I was talking about earlier with the underlying charge piece. Okay, if you're still here with the snacks, give me a thumbs up in the comments. You know I love snacks, and since I can't have one because I'm talking, if you're here with the snacks, let's get some likes, let's get some comments, and please share this on your own social media so that other people can come on over. All right, count two, SX trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. Victim one. The grand jury further alleges that at least in or about 2019 and including in or about 2018, I would suspect this is probably Cassie, in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, the defendant in affecting interstate and foreign commerce knowingly recruited, well, this wouldn't just be Cassie, this would be other people as well, enticed harbor transporters. So this again is moving them around for the purposes of SX trafficking. And that it was done by any combination of all the means used to cause those people to move, that they attempted, aided, and abetted, willfully caused the same. So now they're talking about, because you got to bring the other people in the enterprise into it. By the way, you all, just for the visual if you're looking, but also the mental visual if you're listening, or for your imagination, I suppose. Okay, so this is now where we're getting to the left side of the triangle. So we talked about the right side of the triangle. Now we're connecting the dots. We have the top, which again is the leader, who is for the benefit of as well as directing. We also have on the right side of our the right corner of the triangle, which is the enterprise, the individuals involved, those who carried it out, those who made sure it happened, and are a part of the conspiracy. They are a part of the conspiracy, which means that there was an agreement. And then we connect to, finally, we make the connection to that right side of the triangle, which is the agreement to do what? These are the things that we agreed to do, and we actually did them. There were actual victims. And what does that do? That goes right back up from that bottom right side to, from that bottom left to the top of the triangle, drawing it all together. Again, drawing it all together, that it was what? Ultimately for the benefit of the leader. Okay? Directed it, managed it, had the enterprise with an agreement to do these things. What did they agree to do? They did them. There were victims. All of those victims suffered at the hands of the enterprise, and boom, straight back up, benefit of the leader. And that is how you tie it together. And so now we're tying together these crimes to all of those elements that we talked about in that first 10 pages with the actual offenses charged, of which there are 3. Okay, so these are tied to specific people, again, similar to the R. Kelly case. Now, it says victim 1. That tells us what? There are potential other victims. This is still a very much active case, which means that there are likely to be additional indictments, or this is where deals come into play. You don't want the additional indictments? Let's get to pleading. on some of the things that we have already charged you with. Because, by the way, we do have victims 2, 3, 4, 5, and whatever waiting in the wings. We do have other individuals who have said that there is more that went on than just drug dealing or not drug dealing, but drug distribution, or facilitation rather, and trafficking and arson and all of these other things. We do have other individuals who are ready to really dig into all of the other inner workings. We've got some white collar elements that we're ready to tie in here. So what are you going to do? Are you and your people ready to play Let's Make a Deal? Because we've got baby oil video. Let's not forget, we've got baby oil, video, guns, and drugs. All right. Drugs that were seized. Okay, so this is victim 1. This is related to, again, moving this person back and forth and coercing them to engage, sometimes even by force, in commercial SX acts. Count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution. I know that I'm saying it weird, but again, YouTube. The grand jury further alleges that from at least in or about 2009 up to and including in or about 2024 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Combs knowingly transported an individual in interstate and foreign commerce with intent that the individual engage in prostitution and attempted, aided, and abetted and willfully caused the same to wit Combs that he actually did it as well. So we're talking about either he or his criminal enterprise caused the transportation of, as they alleged here, female victims and commercial SX workers in interstate and foreign commerce on multiple occasions with the intent that they engage in prostitution. So what you essentially have here is individuals who may have come on as paid SX workers, and it's clear that that's what those individuals were there for. However, where this gets messy is that those individuals were allegedly commingled with individuals who did not potentially consent, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about victims, who did not potentially consent to either be a SX worker for Combs and or his associates, or even engage with the ones who were hired. So that is where we get into, I'm sorry for this weird little thing going on with my chair, some green screen issues. So that's where things get a little messy, or a whole lot messy, because this transportation to engage in prostitution is not just about the commercial SX workers who, that's what you do. Not hating. That's what you do. It's the ones who didn't consent to that. By the way, the last offense that I talked about right before this one, the SX trafficking, that's 10 years to life. And the transporting, and of course it could be a fine. And the transporting is a fine or up to 10 years or both. So there's a lot of time at stake and a lot of deals that probably need to be made, unless his attorneys, and he's going to have a legal dream team, there's no doubt about that, unless his attorneys can get everything from those raids thrown out. And trust me, they are going to try. They've already said things even in the past when the raids first happened, that they thought it was an abuse of power and that it went too far and that, and all the things, right? They said the things about the things. But that is also going to be a very important part of what their teams are working around the clock. Trust me, there are associates that are dedicated right now in those firms just to trying to get everything that was seized in that house thrown out. So there will definitely be evidentiary hearings. There will definitely be a hearing related to the search and seizure. That is going to be huge, because if they cannot get those items that were found in that house thrown out, that is going to signal a death knell for Combs in certain elements of his case. I don't think that everything is a slam dunk, although obviously this is a very, very, very small part of everything they have. Indictments do not have to be very detailed. And truth be told, this indictment is not super detailed. In my opinion, the R. Kelly indictment was far more detailed than this. The Varsity Blues indictment was way more detailed than this. It was incredible. That thing read like a novel. It was like 169 pages long, but it was a page turner. I mean, they had everything, including pictures and even transcripts of the including transcripts of the wiretaps in there. So you got a lot of information. In this case, though, this indictment is very, very technical. It really just focuses on the law and how this case fits the laws that they are attempting to convict him under, or the code sections rather that they are attempting to convict him under. So a very technical indictment, well done, fabulous, from looking at it from the standpoint of an attorney, and laying out at least the technical details of your case. And when I say technical as a lawyer, I mean the legalese portion of the case. They did a great job of that, but it really doesn't get into any details. It gives just enough to say we've got something that meets we've got something that meets this element. Now on to the next element. So the next several hearings and individuals who come out, and we're going to see them come out like roaches, individuals who come out trying to save their own necks by saying, I didn't do this, he did this, I didn't do that, he did that. Those individuals are definitely going to provide far more detail. Again, I will be going over the Dawn Richards case, because I do believe that the details in the Dawn Richards case, although really not having a whole hell of a lot to do with what she was asking money for, that's why I think there was, that's why I think it was fairly obvious that she was probably in some way involved in this probe, even if she was called as an unwilling witness. The details there are very informative, in my opinion, of the details here. The details in Cassie's case as well are also very informative of the details here. So what I plan to do, I'm going to finish this up in like 2 minutes because we're at the end of it. What I plan to do is pull. I already have Dawn Richard's case, which we're going to go over anyway. But I'm also going to repull, I guess, Cassie's case as well, because again, I think if we marry up the allegations a bit from those two cases, we get to fill in a lot of blanks that the AUSA, I'm sure, have already filled and will handle in court because it wasn't needed for the indictment. But if you're just reading the indictment, it does feel like, hey, what do they have? Those of us who get it, we get it. But for a layperson, I can definitely understand you saying, I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of code sections in the who, we, what, see, trafficking, coercion, all of this stuff. What happened? Well, in an indictment, you really don't have to get that deep. And you also have to remember there were grand jury proceedings that went on for days in this. So the grand jury who brought down the indictment already heard buckets of the nitty gritty and buckets of the details and all of those things. They're not going to give everything away for a number of reasons. One, they don't have to at this point, because this is just a statement. This is what he's charged with. And two, this is an ongoing investigation. So you don't spill all the tea. You just don't. And you still have a case to try. And we know there'll be leaks, so we'll get more tea for sure. There's already been several people have called vloggers, those of us who have attorney friends, the info comes out. As a result of, so finally, forfeiture allegations. As a result of committing the offenses in count one in this indictment, he shall forfeit to the United States all interests that he acquired, any interest, claims over property, contractual rights of any kind, affording a source of influence over the enterprise named, described herein, anything he established, operated, controlled, conducted, and participated in the conduct of this, and any and all property constituting and deriving from proceeds obtained directly and indirectly said offense. Okay, blah blah blah. I'm going to make this really simple, and they do the same thing with all three offenses. Bottom line is, they did a masterful job of saying that all of everything that he has, all of his companies, his homes, his private assets, all of those things were all used for him to participate in this behavior. So he should have to forfeit those things because those things enable him to do that. So now we're talking about a potential freeze on assets other than your ability to pay your legal fees, a freeze on assets leading up to the case, and certainly a forfeiture of them thereof because they were used for bad behavior, allegedly. So if any of the described forfeitable property as a result of any act of or omission of the defendant cannot be located, has been transferred or sold to or deposited with a third person, remember the house with his kids. Allegedly there's a situation with a house and his kids' names, there's something hinky going on there, has been placed beyond the jurisdiction of the court, so you put stuff in some foreign accounts, has been substantially diminished in value, so you just been tearing up shit or selling it, has been commingled with other property which cannot be subdivided without difficulty, so you invested it in somebody else's stuff in some way. Essentially, you laundered it in a way that would dismantle everything that the other person has going on as well, and they're not involved in that. It is the intent of the United States to seek forfeiture of any property of the defendant up to the value of the above forfeitable property. So we're taking your stuff. So that is the end of the indictment. Wow. There is a lot, right? A whole lot going on here. I'm going to stop the screen share. There is a whole lot going on here, and we will continue to follow this case. We're going to get into it. Like I said, I'm going to marry this up with the Dawn Richard information as well as the Cassie information as well. We're going to go back. Got to look at those notes because it's a lot. And tonight I anticipate bouncing around to some of my fellow favorite YouTubers, including Really BTV, who was on her page last night, talking about coming up to go on and discuss this case further. So there is a lot going on with this. So stay tuned for those who are listening online. Again, stay tuned. Follow me on my YouTube page at Just Johnda. You will at that page, and make sure it is Just Johnda with no space in between. So JustJohnda, because there's another Just Johnda with a space. You'll know that it's me because of the logo. It has my blue logo with Let's Be Honest with Just Johnda. So there you go. You'll know how to find me, Just Johnda, and I will also put the links to everything everywhere so you'll find it. Thank you for hanging with me. If you are someone who is watching this on replay, by all means, please leave comments. I love to hear from you. And make sure that you like and you subscribe so that we can do this a lot more. I look forward to just lots more time talking about fun stuff too. Today is a little serious and a little heavy, but I hope there were times when you learned stuff and, when the levity was appropriate, we had a little bit of it. So you all have a fantastic day. I will see you tonight, if not here directly on my live stream. I expect to pop up on at least one or two others. All right. Have a great day. And if nothing else, if you're interested in it, chances are I'm interested in it and I'm talking about it too. So let's be honest together.